Good morning. Good morning. Happy Monday morning. Glad you are here. I've got a fun message to share with you this morning, a fun personal story that I want to share with you. So let's get started. If you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Now, what does that mean? Let me repeat the statement. What is the statement? When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Well, I believe that statement means that our perspective or our attitude, the meaning that we assign things or what we expect, changes how we behave, how we react, how we respond, and ultimately the life that we live. So let me just say this again. I want to slow down for a second. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Now, again, let me just say that what that means really is that the meaning that we assign events, things that happen in our lives, and ultimately what we expect out of life, it changes how we behave, how we react, how we respond, and ultimately the life that we live, which I think is so important because I think that's what most people miss. Most people believe that they're not in control of ultimately their experiences and the life that they live, that it has so much to do with luck and happenstance and either being at the right place at the right time, or if they're a pessimist, being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'm here to say that's just simply not true. It comes down to this statement that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I mean, I can think about so many times in my life where things that at the time I looked at and thought, how unfortunate that this is happening to me, right? For example, law school. I mentioned this morning in Morning Ascent that I went to 1 year of law school. I didn't finish really the story because it wasn't the story that I wanted to tell or finish, but I flunked out of law school. I flunked out of law school because I had gone down to law school, quite frankly, depressed, distraught. I had just lost my grandfather to pancreatic cancer, a man I was very, very close with. I had lost him. He was going to be traveling there with me to get me acclimated. We were going to do a road trip like we often did. We had mapped out the route on a Rand McNally map. We had traced it with the highlighter. We knew exactly when we were leaving, the cities we were going to stop in, how we were going to get there, and the time he was going to spend in Birmingham getting me set up. And he died 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave of pancreatic cancer. And so I made that route all on my own. And there I am in Birmingham, attending that first year of law school and not being interested at all in law school. I was homesick. I was distraught over the fact that my grandfather had passed away. And at the end of that year, they sent me a letter saying that if you intended to stay in law school, Mr. Ciet, you should probably consider averaging something greater than a D. So that was their way of inviting me to leave law school. And at the time, I thought it was catastrophic. I thought, I can't believe it. I worked all these years making certain that I had great, academic records, my high school record, my college record, the fact that I studied for and got a good enough score on the LSAT, the law school admissions test, to get into law school. And here I am getting this letter at the end of this process. How could this happen to me? Right? I want to go back to this statement. The meaning we assign things and what we expect changes how we behave, react, and respond, and ultimately the life that we live. So I'm going to make this statement again, because I'm going to say this over and over again this morning, because I really want this to be a mantra for you. I want this to be top of mind in your conscious mind, that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. See, we all know this. There are very simple examples of this in life, where we could be in a crowd, standing somewhere on a street, near a street corner, and see an accident occur. We all saw the accident, and the police respond to the accident, attend to the victims of the accident, and then they begin to interview the people in the area who might have seen the accident. And we all saw it. And the police begin to interview each person separately, one at a time. And what is interesting is that the police hear different stories, different perspectives, a different, basically, outline of what happened, even though everybody saw the same accident. Because we all have our own perspective. We have our own attitudes, right? In other words, the meaning that we assign to things and what we expect and what ultimately we experience. And really, ultimately, the life that we live. See, the way we see things, right, affects ultimately the outcome, or at least the perceived outcome. So, look, I want to share with you a story that is near and dear to me. It's a funny story, and you might say, how could you laugh at this? Well, I can laugh at it because I think of this particular perspective here. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. It was November 16th. And it was 5 years ago, my mother's funeral. She had lived a relatively long life, 72 years. She had pulmonary fibrosis, and it's a terminal disease. It took her. And there we were at her funeral. Now, look. Life presents twists and turns in uncomfortable situations. And this was one of those situations. This is one of those moments. My mom's funeral, per my mom's request, was held at my grandparents' parish. They were Catholic. She's Catholic. She was Catholic. And she made it clear that she wanted to be buried in a Catholic cemetery, and she wanted to have a Catholic funeral mass. And she wanted to have it at a particular parish. It was my grandparents' parish, and it was the one that they had gone to for years, and it's the one that my mom had gone to off and on for years, and it was one that I had gone to for many years. And, you know, the community had changed where this parish was located. I mean, initially the community was predominantly Caucasian, and over time it became much more diverse, to the point that it was, by the time my mom had her funeral there, it was predominantly Hispanic. And when I say predominantly, I mean like 110% Hispanic. Like there were no Caucasian people really to speak of in the parish, which was great. It was fine. It was what my mom wanted, and it was her parish, and she went there, oftentimes on Sundays to celebrate Mass. That's where she went. She loved it there, and she loved the people there. Well, that's where my mom wanted it. And my brother, he took the lead and took care of all the arrangements and set the whole thing up. And the day of the funeral, just within just like a fraction of a minute, like with maybe 45 seconds to spare from the time that was supposed to start, in pops the priest. The priest shows up and kind of looks at me and looks at my brother and walks over to the pulpit on stage. And he stares out into the crowd and he says, "Hola." And everybody, you know, looks back at the priest and they don't know how to respond. Now, here's why they don't know how to respond. I want to paint the picture for you, the scene. You got to understand that even though this is a predominantly Hispanic parish, the predominance of people who were at the funeral that day are not. Most of the people are Caucasian. There are some Hispanics, you know, and there's some Asians, and you know, there all sorts. It was a pretty diverse crowd to some extent, except that you've got to understand, just in your mind's eye, kind of see this Caucasian family, my family, the Wonder Bread family, in a Hispanic, Spanish-speaking parish, with the church filled up. This was in Salt Lake City, Utah, in Rose Park, for those of you who are familiar with the Salt Lake area. It was in Rose Park, Our Lady of Guadalupe. And this church is predominantly filled with Mormons. Now, this funeral mass is being led by a Catholic priest who speaks very little and at best broken English, and I didn't know that in the beginning. I found that out as we watched the mass unfold. So here I'm watching my mother's funeral mass being conducted by a priest who really didn't speak any English, and trying to his best, and he tried his best to speak in English, and oftentimes would break into Spanish. But I I want to paint that picture there for you. Do you see the recipe here? It's called disaster. So he gives the eulogy in broken English, and he's pronouncing Mary Margaret with a great flair. Mary Margaret, right, with great flair with his accent. And look, it's a Catholic name apparently. And he's talking about my mom and these generous platitudes, making these general statements about Mary Margaret Ciet. And then comes the consecration, the institution of the sacrament. And I don't know if any of you ever remember Taxi, but if you remember Andy Kaufman and Latka, the character Latka, and how he would speak in that high-pitched kind of squill, and you couldn't understand what he was saying, that is literally, but look, if Elvis were alive, so was Latka, because Latka was at my mother's funeral acting as a priest, because he was channeled through that priest's voice. There was Latka's voice doing the institution or the consecration of the sacrament. And here we are in Our Lady of Guadalupe, Rose Park, Utah, and there's Latka doing the consecration of the sacrament. Now, look, 80% of the audience is Mormon, and there's enough confusion already because the Mormons don't know how to respond in this situation in a mass, right? And I'm watching them as they are confused as to what's being said. First of all, hard to understand what's going on, even if it's being spoken in unbroken English, and why it's being said, and also what the hell's going on with all of the up and down, like all the calisthenics, right? I mean, those of you who are Mormon, you are not used to standing up, sitting down, genuflecting, getting on your knees, praying, that sort of thing. Look, if you want to get a bunch of calisthenics, go to Mass on Sunday. And I'm watching as all of the Mormons in the room are absolutely confused, like, what in the hell is going on? And I could feel it. I could feel all of these eyes on me. I could just feel the energy. And, it's like they're looking at me like, what are we supposed to be doing? What's going on? What do we do next, right? And have you ever felt that pressure in church? I mean, look, at your mom's funeral, I can tell you there was a ton of pressure. It was very, 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 very awkward. Very awkward. Now, look, I know some of you are saying, this is horrible. This is your mom's funeral. I mean, she deserved like this sacred send-off, like this spiritual, moment in this funeral. Well, I have to tell you, she got what she wanted and she got what she deserved. And I say that with love, care, and concern. If you knew my mom and know my relationship with her, she would be, laughing right now and saying, you're absolutely correct. But she did. She got what she wanted and she got what she deserved. She was always the first one to call me on April 1st. I mean, she loved April Fool's Day. She was always excited to get me in some sort of a prank. And I believe this was my mom's doing. It was her last prank. I mean, she knew this was a Hispanic church. She knew this priest spoke broken English because it was her priest. She knew that the place was going to be packed with a bunch of Mormons, many of her friends. And the joke was on us. And here's the best part. The priest consecrates the communion, and those who can take the sacrament do, right? So the Catholics in the room get up and, take the sacrament. Then the Mormons are standing there wondering if they can, if they should. And then everybody, goes back to their spots in the pews, and the priest simply looks out at the crowd, and he stares for a moment, and then just simply walks away. And I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at my former wife, and she's looking at me, and we stare at each other in shock. And I didn't know what exactly had just happened. The priest exits stage right, and I didn't want to look at that point after looking at my former wife, because I knew that if I looked back at her, I was going to break out just laughing because there was so much pressure. You could just cut it with a knife. And yet it was hilarious. It was funny. At least it was to me. That's the way I responded, because otherwise I was going to respond with a great deal of stress and absolutely break down on what could otherwise be a very stressful and sad day. And look, and I knew that if I was confused, that crowd of Mormons behind me was absolutely dumbfounded. And I could feel it, I could sense it, I could smell it. There was mass confusion, pardon the pun. So in utter shock and fear, I refused to look back at the crowd, and I simply walked up to the front of the church, and I stood there with the priest where he was, not where he is, where he was, stood where he was supposed to be standing, and I announced that apparently the service was over. And then I said, ladies and gentlemen, I guess we'll be meeting in the gathering hall. Now that is the truth. That's the way my mother's funeral went. And some of you might be saying, well, that is just horrible. Well, look, I want to take you back to that statement. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I say to people often that the day that my mother passed away, not the funeral, but the day that my mother passed away was one of the most special days. And I know that for some people, they do not relate to that. They don't get it. They say, how horrible. How could you say that? The passing of your mother was a great day? Well, look, I think that it comes down to the meaning that we assign things. It goes back to what I said in the beginning. The meaning we assign things and what we expect changes how we behave, react, and respond, and ultimately the life that we live. See, that day that my mother passed away, the meaning of her life and the day and what she went through and the way in which she passed away. See, I and everyone around her, and the people in my family and those who loved her, had the opportunity to assign the meaning we wanted to it and react the way we wanted to. And I have to tell you that I'm glad we reacted the way that we did. See, the night before my mother passed away, we all gathered around her. We didn't know she was going to pass away. It was absolutely unexpected that the next morning at 5:30 a.m. on the dot, she passed away. That, by the way, I woke up out of a dead sleep at 5:30 a.m. and my brother called me before, or rather after I woke up, and said, she's passing away. I had felt it. I was in a dead sleep. I woke up and I looked over at my phone. It was not ringing. I checked the time. And then within a matter of seconds, the phone started to ring. But that night before, we stood there, gathered around my mom, and she said these words. She said, this is perfect. This is exactly the way I imagined it. And her point was that she wanted that in her last moments that she would be surrounded by her friends and family, and that those who maybe had not spoken, she and her sister, for decades, were now together, and that she was free to go. And I am absolutely certain that that is why that next morning at 5:30 a.m. she passed away. So that when I look at at my mother's passing that day, 5 years ago in November, that I look at it and say that it was a good day. But it was a good day because it was a celebration of my mother's life. It was a good day because it was exactly what my mom had hoped for, that we all pass, and that yet that what she wanted had come to fruition. And I mean, I don't know about you, but how long do we want to hold on to sadness? How long do we want to hold on to negativity? I mean, some of you probably know people who have divorced, and it's been years, sometimes decades, and they still talk very negatively about what they call their ex. I don't even relate to using the term ex. I have a former wife. I don't have an ex-wife. I have a former wife. And I just know that the way that I look at things will change my experience. See, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. That your attitude, the meaning you assign things, and what you expect changes how you behave, react, and respond, and ultimately the life that you live. So I want you to think about some challenges that you've had in your life. And you think about it, you know, when I flunked out of law school, because that's what I did, I flunked out of law school. I am so grateful that that happened, right? And what is interesting is that fortunately I didn't hold on to or beat myself up nearly 30 years ago when I flunked out of law school. I just simply focused on the solution, what I was going to do next, because there was no plan B for me. There was only plan A, that was law school. Then I was left with this situation where I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I have to tell you, I'm so grateful that, quite frankly, I flunked out of law school, because it put me on the path that I've been on for the last 30 years. I am so grateful for that path. I can't imagine having grown as much being an attorney as I have doing what I did, becoming a real estate agent, becoming a multimillionaire and then losing it all and then having to start, all over and starting a company, never having led one before and going through the process of that personal growth. Look, I want to ask you this question, and I want you to think about just your perspective on life. Do things happen to you or do they happen for you? Because every one of us has, quote unquote, bad things happen. How many times has that, quote unquote, bad thing happened and you look back on it decades later and it was a good thing? Like me flunking out of law school. It was a good thing. See, do things happen to you or do things happen for you? See, I had a choice when I flunked out of law school to say that it was happening to me, and woe is me, and wallow in misery and panic, and take a lesser path. Or I could say, you know what, this is an opportunity. This is obviously a sign that I am intended to do something else and pursue that. I want you to think about your past experiences, or maybe your current experience. When you think about this year, how this year has gone, I don't know that there's anybody on this call who could say, yes, this year went as exactly as I expected. If it did, I want to talk to you because I would like you to advise me on the stocks and bonds to invest in and where in this country to invest in real estate. It reminds me of a story that I heard, I think it was Earl Nightingale had shared. He said that there was a newcomer that had come into town and he was looking for new opportunities. And he came across, on the outskirts of the town, he came across a farmer who had been working in his field plowing and had taken a break and had walked over to the fence near the road and was standing there just drinking some water. And so this newcomer stopped his vehicle, got out, and he asked the farmer, he said, excuse me, I'm new in town looking for a place to settle. Just out of curiosity, what kind of people live around here? And the farmer responded by asking, well, what kind of people were there where you came from? And the newcomer says, well, pretty much a bunch of lying, no good, lot of people. The farmer said, well, then that's about what you'll find around here. So the newcomer got in his car and drove to the next town and came across another farmer who was working in the fields. So he stopped, walked over to the fence, got the farmer's attention. The farmer walked over and the man said, hey, look, I'm new in town and I'm looking for a place to settle. I'm just curious, what kind of people are there that come from around here? And the farmer said, well, what kind of people were there where you came from? The newcomer said, no, there were a bunch of lying, no good, thieving lot of people. And the new farmer said the same thing. He said, well, that's about what you'll find around here. The point of the story is this, that what you look for, you find. I mean, that person's experience in the town that he was leaving was his experience because that's what he looks for. His perspective is that people are a bunch of no good, lying, thieving people. And that's what he attracts. So boiling this down, John, what's your message? What are you saying to me? I'm just saying that your perspective, the way that you look at things, dictates your outcome. It doesn't dictate whether there's going to be a pandemic. It doesn't dictate whether there's going to be an economic downturn. It doesn't dictate that there's going to be an election cycle. It's not going to dictate that your candidate won or lost. It doesn't dictate any of that. What it dictates is this. It dictates your behavior. See, it dictates your attitude, the meaning that you assign to things, and what you ultimately expect, and ultimately the life that you live. So I challenge you to ask yourself this question. The way that I look at things, is it productive? Do I look at things that happen and say they happen to me, or these things happen for me? Do you say that the pandemic happened to you, the economic downturn happened to you, that the low inventory is happening to you, that the competition giving away their commissions is happening to you? Or is it happening for you? Because what I know is this, that there are people in today's world who are succeeding to a higher degree than they ever have in life, period, whether we're talking about their relationships, their health, or their business. Because they simply look at things the right way. They assign the right meaning. They don't give it the wrong meaning. At least they don't give it a negative meaning or power over their life. See, I believe that we all have an opportunity to either be a victim or a victor. See, I believe that victims say, life happens to me. Whereas I believe that victors say that life happens for me. That whatever happens, it happens for a reason, and there's an opportunity to learn and grow from it and to get to the next level. You see, I look at failing out of law school as an opportunity to get to the next level. I look at having lost everything in 2008 and 9 as an opportunity to get to the next level. Are you living the life of a victim or a victor? And I think that comes down to simply some pretty simple, basic rules of, do things happen to me or do things happen for me? Recognizing that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. See, I believe that victims live a life where they say that it's out of their control. The pandemic is not within my control. I can't control the fact that the government has shut down non-essential businesses. I can't change the fact that I can't do open houses, or I can't knock on doors and prospect people face to face. So therefore, I'm a victim of this whole circumstance. Versus the victor who says, well, look, none of that's my fault, but I'm not going to focus on that. See, victims focus on the challenges. Victors focus on the solutions. Victims are out of control. Victors are in control. They just simply change the way they look at things. They look for solutions, not to assign blame. See, I believe ultimately that each of us have an opportunity every day to choose that we're going to live a life of fear and reaction, or passion and respond. See, your emergency medical team, when they respond to an accident, they don't think about what they have to do. They just simply do it. In other words, they respond through practice, rote repetition. They know what it takes to be successful in getting a great outcome in bad circumstances. Whereas victims are controlled by fear and they just simply react, running around almost like a chicken with their head cut off, which is disastrous in situations where it's an emergency or where things are tough. See, in the business of real estate, what I believe is that each of us is a leader. And as such, we get to act either the victim or the victor. We get to take control or we get to give up control. We get to say that, we're victims of all of these crazy circumstances, or we just simply say, no, I'm not a victim. I'm a victor. These things are happening for me. These is creating opportunities. And it was so interesting. I think it was Warren Buffett who said that when the crowd is running one direction, run in the opposite direction. Do not go the direction of the crowd, because the crowd runs in fear. And the rule in Wall Street is that when the streets are flowing with blood, the markets, people are not literally dying, but dying in the stock market, and people are dumping stocks, and the stock market is crashing. That's the time that the smart money gets into the market, because it knows that it's just panic. So just in summary, guys and gals, what I want you to really ask yourself is this, is what are the primary principles that are controlling you? Do you look at yourself as a victim when things are difficult and put your hands up and say, well, I don't have any control over any of this. I've got to wait until the pandemic is over. I have to wait until the economy gets better. I have to wait until there's more inventory to get listings, because listings are impossible right now. Or do you simply say, no, that's not true? That all of this isn't happening to me, it's happening for me, and there is an opportunity here for me to get to the next level, because that's what people are doing in today's marketplace. They are. There are people who are in better shape now than they were before the pandemic, There are people who are in better financial condition now than before the pandemic. There are people who are in better relationships now than before the pandemic because they've used everything that's happened between then and now as an opportunity to grow. See, one of the great things about challenges is that it exposes our weaknesses. It exposes the things that we're uncertain of or are not as good at as we otherwise should be. And it gives us an opportunity to focus on those things. It gives us an opportunity ultimately to be resourceful. How resourceful are you? See, I believe that that's what victors are great at, being resourceful. Victims are not great at being resourceful. They're great at assigning blame. They look for people to commiserate with, whereas victors look for opportunity and find opportunity because it is always there. So look, pretty much the end of the message. I just want you to, if you can, think about times in your life where you may have responded as a victim and think about how that worked out for you versus the times where you looked at it and said, no, this isn't happening to me. It's an opportunity to learn, to grow. And think about those times where you did. You stood up against the challenge and you pushed through it. You were persistent. You were consistent. And you got better as a result of it. And you live a better life because of it. Look, don't be one of those people who goes through life with all sorts of negativity and this victim's mentality. Being negative about the person who wronged you. You know, my ex that I am 5, 10, 15, 20 years removed from and still angry with, which makes zero sense to me. Or the passing of a loved one. And I get, look, I love and adore my mom and always will. And do I miss her? Yes, of course I do. But I'm going to make certain that my thoughts of my mom, my memories of my mom are always productive, and that whatever happened and whatever does happen relative to my mom, that it bolsters me, it buoys me up. It doesn't sadden me. It doesn't pull me down. Because again, ladies and gentlemen, just to finish on this, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. All right. So go out there and have a great day. Have a great week. Remember, we are just finishing the waning days of this year, 2020, this crazy year. We've got a great opportunity to finish this year strong. Plan for a great 2021, because regardless of what happens externally, 2021 can be your best year as long as we bring to the table the right perspective, the right attitude, and the right principles like the ones that we've talked about here today. All right. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you next time.